or confidence. And as you bring the three jewels to mind, then the mind settles down, becomes peaceful and clear. And that inspires you to continue your practice of the Buddha's teachings. Okay, so we go from faith, then we come to the next quality which is mentioned among these four pillars of the Dhamma. This is Sila. And Sila we can translate as ethical conduct, good behavior, good conduct. And this has, you can say, two levels of Sila. In Pali we call them Varita and Charita. Varita is Sila, good conduct by way of restraint. And this is the kind of Sila that we undertake that we develop when we undertake the 5 precepts. And so we take these 5 precepts to abstain from killing, to abstain from stealing, to abstain from sexual misconduct, to abstain from false speech, to abstain from the use of intoxicants. And so when you take these 5 precepts, you are putting a kind of brake on the mind to control your behavior. Because where does behavior come from? Behavior comes from the mind. You know, in the first verse of the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, Mano Pubangama Dhamma, Mano Setta, Mano Maya, that all Dhammas originate from the mind. So it's from the mind that there originate corrupt or defiled actions of body and speech. And so when we take the 5 precepts, we are putting some restraining force on the mind, reminding ourselves to avoid killing, to avoid stealing, to avoid the other kinds of transgression. And as we do so, again, this is something that should be repeated every day. At the beginning of the day, to recite with mindfulness and with clear understanding, recite the 5 precepts. And in this way, you are building up in the mind a strong force of moral restraint. And so whenever a tendency arises, an impulse to violate these precepts, any of these precepts, because you've been reciting this on a daily basis, that voice of restraint will arise and stop you from engaging in a transgression. And when you observe these precepts of restraint, the benefit comes not only to yourself, but it also comes to many, many other human beings and other living beings. There's a wonderful sutta, it's in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of the Eights, where the Buddha speaks about 8 types of gifts. And he says that there are 5 of those 8 gifts, 5 of them, he says, a person who takes the precept to abstain from the destruction of life gives safety and security to countless living beings. Because, for example, if I take the precept to avoid killing, it means that every other person, every other living being, even flies and mosquitoes, can feel safe in my presence. Of course, I don't want to invite the mosquitoes to come to suck my blood, but if the mosquito has a thinking mind, it will know that I'm not going to squat it and kill it. And so when you take that precept to abstain from killing, then you're protecting, you're giving security to all other beings. And the same can apply with stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, the use of intoxicants. Taking these 5 precepts, you become a protector of the world. And through your conduct, you become, I say, a model or an example of wonderful conduct for the whole world. A Okay, so that is the aspect of sila, the aspect of restraint, or refraining from unwholesome actions. But the other aspect of sila is charita, which is the cultivation of positive virtues. And for each of these 5 precepts, there is a corresponding virtue, which you cultivate along with the practice of restraint. So when you take the precept to abstain from killing, you're implicitly cultivating the virtue of compassion, because you recognize that just as you yourself cherish your own life, so every other person, every other living being cherishes their life. And when you reflect in that way, it gives rise to compassion, to anukampa, that mind that shakes with the suffering of others and doesn't want to inflict any suffering on others. When you take the precept to abstain from stealing, the corresponding virtue is honesty and contentment, that you remain content with your own possessions, that you remain honest and trustworthy, so that other people can trust you with their possessions. When you take the precept to abstain from sexual misconduct, the positive counterpart to that is faithfulness, remaining faithful to your own partner. Or if you're a monastic, then you observe the virtue of celibacy, purifying the mind of the sensual desire and craving. When you take the precept to abstain from false speech, the positive counterpart to that is truthful speech, which doesn't mean that you can speak anything that comes to your mind because it's true, but you make sure to, especially when you have to speak on something which is of momentous importance, you make sure that you are speaking the truth and that you don't tell falsehood to secure your own benefit in some dishonest way, and you don't speak falsehood in order to harm others. And when you make that commitment to speak the truth, it builds up within your character a very, very strong commitment to truth, so that other people just spontaneously and naturally will trust your word. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've had it where I meet somebody for the first time. I don't know anything about them, but just when we have a little conversation, I start to pick up some vibrations that I don't know whether I can really believe what this person is saying, that they don't seem like an honest person. So that is one kind of feeling that you get. But when you meet another person, you get the feeling, this person is trustworthy. I can believe the word of this person. And so when you practice that strong commitment to truthful speech, you build up that force in your own mind so that it sort of flows out as a kind of vibrational field. So when other people meet you, even for the first time, they get a sense that they can trust your word, that you're believable, that you're a person in whom they can place confidence. And that's a very, very positive, very desirable quality. And then abstaining from the use of intoxicants, the positive virtue is clarity of mind, the ability to develop mindfulness and clear comprehension, sati sampajanya, which you can't develop if you're using intoxicants. Okay, so this is sila, virtuous conduct, good conduct, which in the scheme of the threefold training, we have sila as the basis for samadhi. Samadhi is the basis for panya. But here I'm speaking about a different scheme which the Buddha intended for lay disciples. Okay, the next virtue that the Buddha mentions for the lay disciple is chaga. Chaga is generosity. Excuse me. And generosity is the inner disposition that corresponds to dana. Dana is the act of giving, but the act of giving flows from an inner disposition. And that inner disposition, or that tendency of mind, that quality of mind, is called chaga in Pali, tyaga in Sanskrit. And that is the disposition of mind to relinquish one's possessions when there's a chance to do so, or to share one's wealth and fortune, good fortune, with others. And so the Buddha commends chaga, this quality of generosity, and he always praises the positive manifestation of generosity in the act of giving. Now, in Buddhist tradition, dana is very often understood in a rather narrow sense as being the act of giving that when lay people give the supports to the monastics, when lay people give the monks the robes, alms food, give them shelters, give them medicines. But I think we should understand generosity in a much broader way, that we should be willing and ready to give to others no matter what their situation is. And there's an interesting passage that occurs in some of the later commentaries, particularly from the northern tradition of Buddhism, in which I found a classification, an interesting classification of 3 fields or objects of generosity. There is the field of reverence, the field of gratitude, and the field of compassion. The field of reverence are renunciants. That is, the Buddha says, samana brahmana, that is, ascetics and the renunciant Brahmins, those who renounce the worldly life, the household life, to live a life of self-discipline, meditation, renunciation. And so they receive the offerings of householders out of respect and reverence. And the Buddha encourages his lay people to give to ascetics and Brahmins, renunciant Brahmins, no matter what their religious affiliation. He doesn't say just give to my disciples, not to others, but one should support people living a renunciate life no matter what their particular affiliation is, as long as they're of virtue, of good conduct. So that is the field of reverence. The second is the field of gratitude, and that is the people who constitute the field of gratitude would be one's parents, one's teachers, any benefactors. So when you have feelings of thankfulness and gratitude towards certain people, then you make gifts to them as a way of demonstrating one's gratitude. And then the third field of generosity is the field of compassion. That would be poor people, the underprivileged people, people in need. And so we should bring forth that mind of compassion, a mind of empathy and solidarity with the poor and needy. And we should find opportunities, ways to help them emerge from poverty. Especially, it's not enough just to give to a beggar sitting on the sidewalk with a begging bowl or a begging cup. But this is what I think is a very important task for any society, to find out what are the particular structures and institutions and systems that generate poverty, that maintain poverty, and take action to try to change those systems and structures so that there's a more equitable standard of living for people. In fact, in one of the suttas in which the Buddha explains the duties of an ideal king, he says that the king should ensure that there is no poverty in his realm. And if a king fails to eradicate poverty or fails to take measures to eliminate poverty, then he loses his entitlement to be the ideal monarch, the Chakravarti Raja, the wheel-turning monarch. Okay, so this is the virtue of generosity. Okay, the fourth virtue that the Buddha mentions for the lay disciple is panya, wisdom. And the Buddha says, what is this virtue of wisdom? He says it is the insight into arising and passing away that is noble, penetrative, and leads to the complete extinction of dukkha, the ending of suffering. And so it's the wisdom of arising and passing away. In other words, the insight into impermanence. And that is the insight that has to be developed through insight meditation, vipassana bhavana. And so the Buddha doesn't expect, his lay disciples to go off into the forest, to go to caves, and to devote themselves full time to meditation. But he does encourage the lay disciples, even householders with their families, to spend time to go off into seclusion, even if it's just an hour a day, or even a half an hour 2 times a day, to leave behind the cares and concerns of household life and devote time to developing the mind to gain that insight into arising and passing away. But sometimes people tell me that I'm so busy, I have a family, don't have time to go to meditation, to do meditation. But what I've found is that you can use these principles of wisdom as themes for reflection. Even if you don't have time for concentrated meditation, you use them as themes of reflection to deal with the problems that you face in everyday life. Just to give an example, a few simple examples. So we have, in fact, we're all going to lose our loved ones at some point or another. So we might lose our parents, or you might lose a brother and sister, or you lose a dear friend, or a parent might lose a child. And so if a person doesn't have wisdom, doesn't have any guidelines from the Dharma, when they lose their loved one, they become so miserable, upset. Sometimes they just fall into despair, don't know how to handle it.